The acrid smell of burning rubber and gasoline stung Karen's nostrils, jolting her awake. She scrambled out of bed, heart hammering against her ribs, and rushed to the window. Flames danced in the darkness, consuming something large and metallic in the parking lot below. It was her Harley. Her prized Harley-Davidson, a gleaming symbol of her independence, was being devoured by a raging inferno. Panic seized her. This was no accident. Her motorcycle had been deliberately torched. But who would? Then it hit her. The HOA. The smug faces of the board members flashed before her eyes. The endless stream of passive-aggressive notices about her unruly rose bushes and inappropriate motorcycle attire. The veiled threats about fines and towing. They had crossed a line. Fury, raw and potent, surged through her veins. She would make them pay. Every last one of them. Karen stormed out of her condo, ignoring the concerned shouts of her neighbors who were just beginning to emerge, drawn by the flames and the smell. She knew exactly where to find them. The monthly HOA board meeting was tonight, and they had just picked the worst possible night to test her. As she marched towards the community center, each step fueled by a burning desire for retribution, a plan began to form in her mind. These entitled busybodies thought they could bully her, control her life. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Reaching the community center, Karen threw open the doors with a bang that silenced the room. Every eye turned towards her, their faces a mixture of annoyance and fear. Good. Let them fear. "Someone just burned my Harley," she announced, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "And I know exactly who's responsible." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. The HOA board members, seated at their table at the front, exchanged uneasy glances. Harold, their Duffy president, sputtered, "Now, Karen, I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Karen cut him off, her voice laced with venom. "My bike is a charred hunk of metal, and you think this is a misunderstanding?" She stalked towards them, each step deliberate, menacing. "You've been targeting me since the day I moved in. Harassing me about my rose bushes, my clothes, my motorcycle. You think you can push me around, control me?" She slammed her fist on the table, making the nameplates jump. The room went silent, everyone holding their breath, anticipating her next move. "Well, you messed with the wrong woman," Karen growled. "I'm a lawyer and I know my rights. You will pay for what you did, not just for my bike, but for every single act of harassment, every threatening letter, every dirty look." The color drained from Harold's face as he stammered, We have no idea what you're talking about. We would never." "Oh, really?" Karen reached into her bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "These are copies of every single complaint filed against me, every notice, every violation. And guess what? They're all bogus. And I have witnesses to prove it." Karen surveyed the stunned faces before her, a sense of satisfaction washing over her. They had underestimated her, treated her like an easy target. Now, they would face the consequences. "I'm giving you one chance," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Admit what you did. Apologize. And then we can talk about compensation." She let the silence hang in the air, thick with tension. Before anyone could respond, a deep voice boomed from the back of the room. "She's telling the truth." All eyes turned towards the source of the voice. A tall, imposing man with a graying beard and a stern expression stood at the back, his arms crossed over his chest. Recognition dawned on Karen's face. It was Mr. Davis, a retired police officer who lived at the edge of the complex, notoriously reclusive, but deeply respected. "I saw them," Mr. Davis continued, his voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced the room. "3 figures dressed in black, lurking around the parking lot earlier tonight. They were carrying gas cans." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Harold, his face ashen, sputtered, "This is preposterous. We have no knowledge of any such." "Don't play dumb," Mr. Davis interrupted, his gaze unwavering. I recognized one of them. It was your son, Harold. The one who always wears that ridiculous baseball cap. Harold's face crumpled. The other board members, their composure cracking, began to murmur amongst themselves, casting nervous glances at Karen and Mr. Davis. The tide was turning, and they knew it. Karen allowed a small, triumphant smile to play on her lips. So, she said, her voice cold and steady, it seems my accusations weren't so outlandish after all. Now, are we going to do this the easy way, or are we going to do this the hard way? She pulled out her phone, letting them see the screen. I've already contacted the police. They're on their way. And trust me, I have enough evidence here to put your entire board behind bars for a very long time. The room fell silent once more, the only sound the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The board members looked at each other, their faces a mixture of fear and desperation. They had underestimated their adversary, and now they were trapped. Then a voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. Wait, a woman on the board pleaded, her voice trembling. We can explain. All eyes turned to Mrs. Henderson, the board treasurer, a woman known for her meticulously kept lawn and equally meticulous rule following. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Karen raised an eyebrow, her expression a mixture of skepticism and morbid curiosity. Oh, she drawled. So there was a plan. Do enlighten us. Mrs. Henderson glanced nervously at her fellow board members, then back at Karen. We just wanted to scare you, she confessed, her voice wavering. You refused to conform, to be reasonable. The roses, the motorcycle, it was all too much. Reasonable. Karen scoffed. You set my bike on fire, and you call that reasonable. It was Harold's idea. Mrs. Henderson blurted out, pointing a trembling finger at the board president. He said you needed to be taught a lesson. Harold, his face now the color of old yogurt, started to protest, but the words died in his throat. The other board members, sensing weakness, pounced. Accusations flew across the room, blame traded like a hot potato. The carefully constructed facade of civility and decorum crumbled, revealing the petty tyranny and simmering resentment that lay beneath. Karen watched the spectacle unfold, a cold smile playing on her lips. They were pathetic. A bunch of small-minded bullies drunk on power and fueled by their own insecurities. They wanted to break her, to make her conform to their narrow worldview. But they had chosen the wrong person to mess with. As the board members descended into chaos, the sound of sirens pierced the air, cutting through the din. Karen glanced at her phone. Right on time, the cavalry had arrived. With a final, disdainful look at the panicked faces of the board members, Karen turned towards the door as the sirens grew louder, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over her. They wanted a show. She would give them one they would never forget. The arrival of the police brought a stunned silence over the room. Two officers, a young man with a wary expression and a seasoned woman with a no-nonsense air, surveyed the scene. Karen, phone still in hand, approached them with an air of practiced confidence. Officer, she addressed the woman, her voice calm and steady. I believe you'll find this a rather interesting situation. We have a case of arson, witness tampering, harassment, and possibly conspiracy to commit assault. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Karen, enjoying the shift in power, gestured towards the panicking board members. These upstanding citizens decided to teach me a lesson about community rules. They didn't appreciate my choice of landscaping or my preferred mode of transportation, so they torched my motorcycle. The officers exchanged glances. The younger one smirked, while the older one maintained a professional facade, but Karen could see a flicker of something like satisfaction in her eyes. They had probably seen their fair share of HOA disputes, but nothing quite like this. We have a witness, Karen continued, tilting her head towards Mr. Davis, who stood silently by the door, his arms still crossed, a grim satisfaction etched on his face. He saw everything. Mr. Davis, at Karen's nod, provided a concise and damning account of what he had witnessed. He pointed out Harold's son among the arsonists, a detail that made Harold's already pale face turn a sickly shade of green. As the officers began separating the board members for questioning, chaos erupted. Accusations flew, denials were stammered, and pleas for leniency filled the air. Karen watched the spectacle unfold, a sense of detached amusement mingling with her lingering anger. They were so focused on saving their own skins, they had forgotten about the community they claimed to serve. The older officer, noticing Karen's detached demeanor, approached her. "You handling this well?" she remarked, a hint of respect in her voice. Karen offered a tired smile. "Years of corporate law teach you a thing or two about navigating messy situations." Her gaze hardened. "Besides, some things are worth fighting for." The officer nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Don't worry," she assured Karen, placing a hand on her arm. "We'll get to the bottom of this." But even as the officer spoke, Karen couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. This wasn't over. Not even close. This was just the beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of police interviews, insurance adjusters, and calls from eager reporters who had gotten wind of the HOA inferno. Karen, now dubbed Rebel Rider by the local news, found herself an unexpected local celebrity. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages of support from strangers, some even offering to organize a biker rally outside the courthouse during the board members' hearing. While a part of her relished the wave of public support and the sweet taste of justice being served, another part felt a growing unease. Harold's panicked whisper at the community center, "You don't understand who you're dealing with," echoed in her mind. It was just an HOA, a group of petty tyrants, but something about their desperation, their utter collapse, didn't sit right. Her unease amplified when the insurance company contacted her. Her motorcycle, considered a total loss, was fully covered. However, the company balked at her request for a replacement of the same model, citing difficulty sourcing parts. Strange, considering she had purchased the bike brand new just last year. Then came the visit from Mr. Davis. He sat across from her in her living room, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by a cautious concern. "Something's not right," he said, his voice low. "The police haven't been able to formally charge anyone. Seems like some evidence went missing from the station. And," he hesitated, "Harold and his family are gone. Vanished." Karen felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't adding up. It was one thing for the HOA to act on their petty grievances, but to involve themselves in police corruption, witness tampering, and now a possible disappearance. This was a whole new level of crazy. "I did some digging," Mr. Davis continued, placing a file on the coffee table. "Turns out our dear Harold had some connections. Used to work for a real estate developer, one with a less than stellar reputation. Word on the street is, they're not too fond of anyone interfering with their business." Karen stared at the file, a sense of dread creeping up her throat. This wasn't just about her motorcycle anymore, was it? She had stumbled into something bigger, something dangerous. And she had a sinking feeling she had only just scratched the surface. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Davis looked at her, his expression grim. "Now," he said, his voice steely, "we fight back." The file Mr. Davis provided contained news clippings, court documents, and financial records that painted a disturbing picture. Harold, far from being a bored retiree with too much time on his hands, was a fixer for a shadowy real estate development firm known as Obsidian Holdings. They were notorious for using intimidation tactics, legal loopholes, and sometimes worse, to acquire properties and silence opposition. Obsidian has been trying to acquire this entire neighborhood for years, Mr. Davis explained, tracing a finger along a map of the area. They want to build a luxury high-rise complex. Most residents sold, tempted by the generous offers, but some held out. Looks like they decided to persuade the remaining holdouts. Karen felt a cold fury building inside her. They had used the HOA, a seemingly innocuous entity, as a front for their dirty dealings, turning neighbor against neighbor, all for a quick profit. But why target me? She asked. I wasn't even one of the holdouts. I bought my place from a developer years ago. Mr. Davis tapped a finger on another document, a property deed with Karen's name on it. You weren't the target. Until recently. Seems like Obsidian acquired the remaining properties through some shady legal maneuvering, including yours. They probably forged your signature on a sale agreement. Karen stared at the document, her blood running cold. She had been played, manipulated into a fight she didn't even know she was a part of. But now she was in too deep. They had underestimated her, mistaken her resilience for weakness. They wanted to scare you off, make you leave quietly, Mr. Davis said, his voice grim. But they messed with the wrong woman. Now, they're scared. They know you're onto them. Fear was a luxury Karen couldn't afford. She had been a lawyer long enough to recognize a threat when she saw one. Obsidian played dirty, but she knew the law, knew how to fight fire with fire. They want to play dirty? Karen asked, a steely glint in her eyes. Let's give them a game they'll never forget. She pulled out her phone, a new determination hardening her resolve. She was calling in favors, reaching out to her network of lawyers, journalists, and activists. Obsidian wanted to play a game. Fine. But they had picked the wrong opponent. This wasn't just about a motorcycle anymore. This was about justice. This was war. The fight against Obsidian Holdings was long and arduous. Karen, fueled by righteous fury and armed with her legal expertise, became a force to be reckoned with. She organized her neighbors, exposing Obsidian's web of deceit and intimidation through press conferences, community meetings, and a relentless social media campaign. The story, already sensationalized as the HOA Inferno, took on a life of its own, attracting the attention of national media and sparking outrage across the country. Karen's legal team, bolstered by pro bono support from top firms disgusted by Obsidian's tactics, filed a class action lawsuit, meticulously building a case that exposed the company's fraudulent activities. Obsidian, initially dismissive of the nuisance lawsuit, found themselves on the defensive. Their attempts to silence Karen with threats and bribes backfired spectacularly as she used their tactics to further expose their corruption. The more they tried to intimidate her, the stronger she became, a symbol of resistance against corporate greed and injustice. Mr. Davis, a constant presence by her side, proved an invaluable ally, using his law enforcement contacts to leak incriminating evidence and pressure the police to conduct a thorough investigation. The disappearance of Harold and his family remained a mystery, a silent testament to the lengths Obsidian would go to protect their secrets. The lawsuit dragged on for months, a grueling battle of legal maneuvering and public opinion. But slowly, steadily, the tide began to turn. Witnesses, intimidated into silence, were emboldened by Karen's courage and came forward with their stories. Whistleblowers from within Obsidian, disgusted by the company's actions, provided damning evidence. Finally, the day of the settlement hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, journalists rubbing shoulders with Karen's supporters, all eager to witness the outcome. Obsidian, their reputation in tatters, their stock plummeting, agreed to a hefty settlement that included compensation for the homeowners, the reinstatement of their property rights, and a public apology. As Karen addressed the crowd outside the courthouse, a wave of cheers erupted. She had won. They had won. But even as she basked in the glow of victory, a part of her knew the fight wasn't over. Obsidian might have been brought to their knees, but there were countless others like them, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to exploit and manipulate. Karen glanced at Mr. Davis, who stood beside her, a hint of pride in his eyes. "It's not over, is it?" he asked, his voice gruff but understanding. Karen shook her head, a steely glint in her eyes. "No," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "It's just the beginning." She had found her purpose, discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, and she would use it to fight for what was right, to protect the vulnerable, and to hold the powerful accountable. The roar of the crowd echoed in her ears, a sound of hope, of solidarity, a sound that told her she was no longer alone. The rebel rider was here to stay.